The Montana wilderness can be harsh, especially in winter. Survival here relies on instinct, strength, and determination. One fateful night, while a blizzard battered the mountains, a surprising event unfolded. A man and his daughter, caught far from shelter, found they were not alone in the storm. From the shadows of the pine trees, a small figure appeared, silent, desperate, and persevering. A tiny bobcat cub, struggling to stay alive, followed them through the thick snow, step by trembling step. What compelled this wild creature to seek their help? And could they save it before the storm overtook them all? This is the remarkable story of survival, trust, and a journey that would alter their lives forever. Before diving into the details, if you're enjoying this, consider hitting the like button and subscribing. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss any future stories. The January wind howled through the pines of the Montana wilderness, swirling snow that limited visibility to just a few feet. Mark Townsend pulled his wool cap lower over his ears and adjusted the scarf that covered much of his face. At 53, he had experienced many brutal winters in the northern Rockies, spending most of his adult life in this remote area of the Bitterroot Range. Beside him, his 12-year-old daughter, Emma, trudged along, her bright blue snowsuit standing out against the white landscape. "How much farther, Dad?" Emma's voice barely cut through the howling wind. "Just another mile to the ridge," Mark assured her, glancing at his compass. "The view will be worth it, I promise." Emma had been eagerly anticipating this winter hike for weeks. Since her mother passed away 3 years ago, these father-daughter adventures had become their special ritual, a way to feel connected to each other and to the natural world that Susan had loved so much. Initially, the weather forecast had predicted clear skies, but mountain weather is notoriously fickle, and the snowstorm had rolled in unexpectedly about an hour into their hike, transforming their enjoyable outing into a more challenging trek. Mark wasn't overly worried. They were well equipped, and their cabin was only 6 miles away. "Maybe we should head home," he suggested, noticing Emma's rosy cheeks. She looked a bit disappointed, but nodded reluctantly, understanding her father's concern. "We can try for the ridge another day." With that, they adjusted their path, following the tracks they had already made in the snow. As they made their way back to the cabin, Mark noticed something unusual in the snow. There, among the tracks they had left behind, were small paw prints. They were fresh and too tiny to belong to an adult predator, yet they clearly showed the pattern of a feline. The round pads and the absence of claw marks indicated it wasn't a dog. "Look, Dad," Emma said, pointing to a group of trees weighed down by snow. Mark followed her gaze and spotted some movement. A small, tawny creature was struggling through the deep snow. Its steps were shaky and its head hung low. "It's a bobcat," Mark noted, his voice low with surprise. "A young one." "Is it hurt?" Emma asked, her concern clear. Mark shook his head, uncertain. "I can't tell, but it looks like it's having a tough time. It might have gotten separated from its mother during the storm." As they observed, the bobcat lifted its head and let out a weak cry that echoed in the cold air. To their surprise, it turned and began to move toward them. "Stay still," Mark instructed Emma. He knew that wild animals, even young ones, could be unpredictable. The cub stumbled forward, its legs giving way in the deep snow. Mark could see its ribs even through its thick coat, and its eyes appeared dull from exhaustion. It looked to be only 4 or 5 months old enough to have been weaned, but still too young to survive on its own, especially in such harsh conditions. "Dad, it needs help," Emma whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "It's going to die out here." Mark understood her worry. Without its mother in this severe storm, the young bobcat didn't stand a chance. Yet, he had always taught Emma to respect wildlife and let nature take its course, no matter how harsh it seemed. But as the cub fell again, trembling in the snow, looking up at them with what felt like a plea for help, Mark's heart ached. He remembered how Susan would have acted. She always had compassion for creatures in need. "All right," he finally said, "but we need to be careful." He slowly took off his thick, hand-knitted scarf, a gift from Susan, and approached the cub with gentle steps. Speaking softly, he said, "Easy there, little one. We're going to help you." To Mark's surprise, the bobcat cub didn't run away. Instead, it stayed where it lay, too weak even to show fear. With gentle care, Mark wrapped the scarf around the small bobcat cub and lifted it carefully. It felt lighter than he expected, and he could sense its weak, rapid heartbeat against his hands. "Is it going to be okay?" Emma asked, watching her father return with the bundled cub. Mark hesitated, looking down. "I don't know, honey. It's in pretty bad shape," he admitted, tucking the bundle inside his jacket for extra warmth. "But we'll do what we can." As they made their way back to the cabin, the urgency of their task grew. The cub didn't struggle in Mark's hold, which made him even more uneasy. Typically, wild cats resist restraint fiercely, and this cub's calm demeanor suggested it was in dire condition. By the time the outline of their cabin emerged through the swirling snow, Mark's arms were aching from the extra weight. Emma dashed ahead to open the door and tended to the fire that had been left burning low before they left. Once inside, Mark carefully placed the scarf-wrapped bundle on the kitchen table. Emma quickly filled a hot water bottle, and together they created a makeshift nest from an old wooden crate, softening it with blankets and positioning it close to the wood stove for warmth. "What does it need, Dad?" Emma asked, her face marked with worry as she observed the barely moving cub. Mark paused, choosing his words thoughtfully. He wasn't a wildlife expert, yet he had learned enough from his visits to the local wildlife center. "First, it needs warmth," he said. "Then probably some food and water, but not too much at once." He filled a small bowl with water, adding a pinch of salt and sugar, a simple rehydration solution he had picked up from one of the center's volunteers. "We should also prepare ourselves for the possibility that it might not survive, Emma. It's in pretty rough condition." Emma's expression shifted to one of determination. "It will make it. I know it will." Mark didn't argue with her. Instead, he demonstrated how to use an eyedropper to administer tiny amounts of the rehydration solution to the weak cub. Initially, it wouldn't swallow, but after several patient attempts, it began to accept the liquid. As night fell and the storm continued to rage outside, Mark and Emma took turns watching over their unexpected guest. Mark tried to call the nearest wildlife rehabilitation center using their satellite phone, but the storm had closed all the roads. Emma asked the question while sitting cross-legged on the floor beside the crate, observing the steady rise and fall of the cub's breathing. Mark cautioned her, pointing out, "We shouldn't name it. Remember, it's not a pet. If it survives, it needs to go back to the wild." Emma nodded but looked thoughtful. "I understand, Dad, but it needs a name while it's with us." "What about Ash? Its fur is that color, and we found it when it was almost, gone like ashes." Mark couldn't help but smile. "Ash it is." Throughout the long night, they kept watch. By morning, Mark was pleasantly surprised to see that the cub was still alive. Not just alive, but showing signs of improvement. Its eyes were clearer, and it was making weak attempts to clean its fur, a good sign for any cat. The storm raged for 3 days. During that time, their small cabin turned into a makeshift wildlife hospital. Mark used supplies from their first aid kit to make a feeding bottle, offering the cub a small mixture of egg and milk, along with tiny pieces of venison jerky they had brought for their hike. By the 4th day, when the storm finally let up, Ash had gained enough strength to stand and explore the crate. His true personality began to shine through. Curious, surprisingly gentle, yet with flashes of the wild spirit that was in his nature. Mark over breakfast said, "We need to get him to the wildlife center now that the roads are clearing. They'll know how to rehabilitate him for release." Emma's face fell. "Can't we keep him just a little longer? He's getting better with us." Mark sighed, understanding her attachment but worried about what was best for the young bobcat. He decided to make another phone call. The news from the Wildlife Center's director caught him off guard. Due to the severe winter and multiple rescues after the storm, they were at capacity. When Mark described the cub's condition and the care they had given him, the director suggested they continue as they were for a few more weeks, with guidance from the center staff over the phone. "They want us to keep him?" Emma asked, her eyes lighting up. "Just temporarily," Mark emphasized, "until they have space or until he's strong enough to be released back near where we found him. We have to be very careful not to let him get too used to humans. He needs to remember he's wild." Emma nodded quietly, but you could feel her excitement. "I'll be careful, Dad. I promise." The weeks that followed changed everything for them. Ash grew stronger every day, his coat becoming shiny again, and he moved with more grace and power. They moved him from a small crate to a larger enclosure Mark built on their covered porch. This way, Ash could experience the fresh air and nature around him while still being safe from the harsh weather. Following the advice of the rehabilitation center, they kept their contact with Ash to a minimum. Still, Emma found it hard to resist sitting close to his enclosure, reading aloud from her books, as if the wildcat could follow along. To Mark's amusement, Ash often seemed to be paying attention, his tufted ears turning towards her voice. As winter gently shifted towards spring, Ash began to act differently. He became more restless, pacing his enclosure and showing a keen interest in the forest surrounding their cabin. Mark realized it was time to start preparing Ash for his return to the wild. "We need to start taking him out," he told Emma one evening in early March. "Let him relearn what it means to be a bobcat." Emma nodded, though her eyes revealed her mixed feelings. "How do we do that?" Mark shared his plan, worked out with guidance from the Wildlife Center. They would take Ash into the forest on a long lead, allowing him to explore and tap into his natural instincts while making sure he could be brought back safely. Their first outing was cautious. Ash looked overwhelmed by the vastness of the woods, staying close to Emma's legs and flinching at every little sound. However, with each new adventure, his confidence began to build. He started to track small creatures, his instincts gradually awakening. By mid-April, they decided to let Ash roam freely during these forest trips while keeping an eye on him from a distance. To Mark's relief, Ash always returned when called, a behavior that was both comforting and concerning. "A wild bobcat shouldn't come back like a pet cat," he explained to Emma one evening after Ash willingly followed them back to the cabin. "The rehabilitation center says we need to start the final phase of release," he continued. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded defiantly. "What do we do?" she asked. "We need to stop calling him back and let him stay out longer." Each time, he ultimately decided to stay in the forest, where he belonged. The process turned out to be more challenging than they had expected. After leaving Ash in the woods, Emma frequently glanced back, her face reflecting both hope and heartbreak. For several days, Ash would return to the edge of the clearing by their cabin, meowing to be let into his enclosure. "It's not working, Dad," Emma finally said after nearly 2 weeks of this routine. "He doesn't want to be wild." Mark sat beside her on the porch steps, watching as Ash groomed himself in the fading sunlight. "It's not about what he wants, Emma. It's about what he needs, what's best for him in the long run." "But why can't what's best for him include us?" Emma's voice was small but persistent. Mark took a moment to choose his words. He understood this lesson was bigger than just the bobcat. Remember, Ash was born wild. That wildness is a part of him. Right now, he's young, and the forest feels frightening compared to the safety of his enclosure and the meals we give him. As he matures, he'll feel the pull of his true nature more strongly. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "If we keep him from this, if we prevent him from becoming who he is meant to be, we'd be doing him a disservice. He deserves to be truly happy and fulfilled, not just to meet our needs." Emma was silent for a moment, watching Ash. "Like how you let me try things even when they're hard or scary, because you know I need to learn and grow?" Mark smiled, feeling proud of her insight. "Exactly." The next day, they took Ash deeper into the forest than ever before, to a spot abundant with signs of small game. When it was time to head home, they simply walked away without looking back or calling for him to follow. For Emma, this was the hardest walk of her young life. Mark noticed her struggle with the urge to turn around to see if Ash was trailing behind, as he sometimes did. But she kept her eyes forward, her small hand gripping his tightly. That night, Ash didn't return to the cabin, nor did he come back the following night. By the third night, Mark heard Emma's quiet sniffles from her bedroom, a sign that she was weeping herself to sleep. He sat on the edge of her bed, gently stroking her hair. "I miss him," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart. I do too. Do you think he's okay out there?" Mark considered her question thoughtfully. "I believe he's finding his way." Mark often thought about how strong Ash had become and how well he was hunting during their practice sessions. Ash had truly developed the skills he needed. A week went by without any sign of him. Then one morning, while Mark was chopping wood and Emma was working on her homeschool assignments inside, he noticed some movement at the edge of the forest. There, bathed in dappled sunlight filtering through the trees, sat Ash the bobcat. He looked different, more muscular and alert, his coat blending perfectly with the forest shadows. He watched Mark with bright, intelligent eyes that no longer showed the dependency of his kittenhood. "Emma, come here," Mark called softly toward the open window. Emma appeared on the porch, her curiosity quickly turning into joy as she spotted Ash. "He's back!" "Don't approach him," Mark cautioned. "Let him come to us if he wants to." They stood there, hardly breathing, as Ash considered them from his spot at the forest's edge. With deliberate steps, the bobcat crossed the clearing, stopping a few feet away. He regarded them with what seemed like recognition, but also a hint of wariness. Emma slowly knelt down, extending her hand palm up in the greeting they had always used. For a long moment, Ash stood still. Then he moved forward, pressing his head briefly against her hand before stepping back. He repeated the gesture with Mark, a deep purr vibrating from his chest. "He remembers us," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," Mark replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I think he's saying goodbye." Just then, Ash turned and trotted back toward the forest. At the edge, he paused to look back one last time, his powerful form silhouetted against the green backdrop. With a flick of his tufted ears, he disappeared into the underbrush. Emma leaned against her father, a mix of sadness and something else, pride on her face. "He's really wild now, isn't he?" "He always was," Mark said gently. "We just helped him find his way back to it." In the years that followed, they occasionally caught glimpses of a bobcat in the woods around their cabin. They could never be sure it was Ash, but Emma liked to think it was. She believed he was fully grown and thriving in the wilderness, his true home. On Emma's 16th birthday, Mark gave her a special gift, a carved wooden bobcat, its features capturing the same determined spirit they had seen in Ash. "This is to remind you," he said, as she turned the carving in her hands. Emma placed the carving on her windowsill, where the morning light would catch its details each day. She reflected on how much her mom would have appreciated their efforts to help someone in need. Mark smiled, thinking about Susan and her endless compassion for all living creatures. He knew she would have admired Emma's kindness, strength, and the wisdom it took to recognize when it was time to let go. As twilight descended over the Montana wilderness, a bobcat's cry resonated through the trees. It was wild, free, and exactly where it belonged.